Uh, and there we go. There's the cough. And I can promote Brandon to panelist. The good news is that I can't possibly infect you guys, um, through Zoom. But if that ever happens, then this is like we're in a sci-fi movie if I'm able to give a cold through Zoom. But anyway, hi Brandon, how are you?
Hey Alice, good to see you. I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
Oh, well, other than this cold, no real complaints. Just it's that time of year. Wash your hands, everybody. There's a cold going around.
Yeah, I just had it a few weeks ago, but thankfully I'm all better now.
Oh, well, that's good. Glad to hear that. Bodes well for me. There's light at the end of this tunnel. Okay, cool. Well, let's get into it. Because in this series, it's post-production is the part that I know the least about. So I'm very excited to learn a little bit about how the process works. But before we get into that, may I have you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. So my name is Brandon Tambori. I currently run my own production company called Joke Zero, which is focused on comedy, films, and other content. I started my career working at a company called Palm Star Media. They've produced or financed a bunch of movies, including Hereditary from A24, which I was an associate producer on. I also used to work for National Lampoon, the comedy brand, where I produced and directed comedy specials and podcasts, live comedy shows, and things like that. And then more recently, I wrote, directed, and produced a feature film that's called Plan B that Joke Zero produced, and it was released towards the end of 2024. So it's been out for about a year and a half now. And yeah, I'm excited to do this. I did a couple previous webinars where I talked about pre-production and also talked about production. And there was one in the beginning where I just generally talked about making a film. And now I'm here to talk about post-production.
Yeah, kind of close it out. Okay, cool. Well, to get us started, because I think everybody kind of understands like broadly what post-production means. But just if we could kind of give them a little bit of a what am I trying to say here? Like what are the categories that go into post-production? Like obviously there's editing, but then there's also like sound mixing and color correction and what do we mean when we say post-production? What does that even encompass?
So I would say it really means everything that happens from actually shooting the film to having your film come out. Some might say that it's not necessarily when the film comes out, but once you deliver it to your distributor, or if you are a studio or making a studio film, it would just be once the film is totally finished because you're going to be the one putting it out. But you mentioned sound. So let's go through a couple different, I would say, positions, I would say, and team members that are part of the post-production process. So one you're going to have most likely, who I'd say is first, is a DIT, which that person is often on set. They're working in the camera department and they're actually taking all of the all of the footage that you shoot, whether it be sound and audio, and linking it together, syncing everything, and then making what are called dailies so that the director, production team, and really the editor can actually look at them. And if you're lucky, that will happen while you're actually on set because it's great to be able to see some of your work while you're there. If not, some independent films just don't have the luxury of hiring someone to do that. It might just have to be done in post, and maybe the assistant editor does it or the editor. Um, the other process that would happen after that is the assembly. So that's when the editor gets all of the film and puts it really just in an assembly. It's usually not that creative of a process. They're often just looking at the script. And if there's a script supervisor making notes, they might go off of that as well. After the assembly is typically a director's cut. I'm also happy to jump more into all of these afterwards, but I'll just kind of run through them quickly now. The director's cut's when the director is working with the editor to get really get the cut in as good of shape as possible. After that, it's typically a producer's cut where the producers will go in and work with the editor and also the director. Then there'll be the final cut, which is when the film's actually finished. Well, I don't want to say finished, when the picture is actually finished being edited, because there's still a lot of work after that. Then it would be the sound design, which is like sound effects, cleaning up the audio, all of that. There's usually a sound designer or maybe even a team. Music, which could be the composer or just music or songs that is licensed to go into the film. The color grade, which there's usually a colorist or again a team working on the color, and then any visual effects. Sometimes there's no visual effects. Sometimes it's a big big budget movie that might have hundreds of people working specifically on VFX. Um, After that, there's usually like an online editor working with you who is typically putting in, say, like credits and titles and doing different things to help prepare the film for the delivery process. Then there's actually the delivery process, which is really the final stage. A lot of filmmakers don't really, one, know they have to do this, or two, more importantly, budget to do this because it's very expensive. The delivery process is technical and legal, where you're not only delivering the film, like the video files and sound files, but also like every contract that is associated with the film, plus a bunch of other contracts that you probably don't have that you have to hire someone to do like at this last minute. And then once you finish that, I would say your film is finished and you just really wait for it to come out. I know I just covered a lot in a brief period of time, but I'm happy to go over any of those in more detail, especially if there's any questions at the end.
Yeah, for sure. So, because like pre-production, I've never had the fortune or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, of like really being in charge of running pre-production, which is probably for the best for everybody. I used to be an actor, so I would like just show up to set, like obviously any rehearsals that they needed, casting, what have you. And then like I would just do my job. And then like the movie fairies turn whatever the hell it is I did into some kind of movie. So I'm learning right along with us. But in terms of like an indie feature, let's just say, a reasonably budgeted indie feature. So not like a micro, you put it on a credit card kind of budget.
Mhm.
Roughly how many people would would one need for posts? Like obviously we need an editor if, the director isn't going to edit themselves. Um, like
Yeah,
it's
I would say like on a reason, yeah, I would say like a reasonable budget. And nowadays you can have like a $10 million independent film. I'm not necessarily
right.
talking about that. I'll try to say like under a million. I feel like nowadays there's a lot of filmmakers who are doing anything in like the 300,000 to like a million range, which is still very much low budget. But I would say very important is the director. Some people might just think a director's on set directing, but a director's very much involved in post-production, especially in that first director's cut. Very often for indie films, the director's just wearing a bunch of hats. Maybe if it's a studio film, the director does the director's cut and kind of backs off a little bit. But the director's important. Producers or production company, or maybe studio executives. I would say some people might not like them involved, especially studio execs, but at the same time, I like to think that they're helpful. The more people that see your film during the editing process, the better, in my opinion, just because the director or filmmaking team is so in it at that point that it's good just to get some outside thoughts on it. Then there's obviously the editor, who is the one clicking the buttons and actually editing the film. Sometimes there will be a bigger editing team. You might have an assistant editor, which is great, and you might not. It depends on the size of the film. A colorist is very important as well because you want them to really just help make the look of your film. A sound designer, which is very important as well. Maybe there's a big sound team, but a lot of indies in this range might just have like a one person sound designer who's doing everything, and Foley and ADR and all of that can be done by one person. It's not not the best, but there are some really great sound designers who do that. A composer is definitely important. They're the ones who are writing original music for your film. If you're fortunate enough, a music supervisor who will help with licensing music. So if there's a song you really want, maybe the music supervisor can help license that. But I do realize a lot of indies aren't really fortunate enough to have a music supervisor. A VFX team for a sub-$1 million movie, you're not going to have a massive team. If you watch a Marvel movie, you might see the credits and there could be like hundreds of people specifically for VFX. For something like a sub-$1 million movie, especially if it's like a comedy, which is what I specialize in. You might have like one or two VFX people, depending on how many VFX you actually need. An online editor. Sometimes the director or editor can do these things, but if you can have an online editor, it's super important, I think, just because when you actually go to deliver a film, you'll get a big, essentially a contract that might be like up to 40 pages long of all of the things that you need to send over to the distributor. And a lot of times you as the director or producer are going to have no idea what any of these technical things are. So the online editor will help do that. Then I would say another thing, maybe not for sub million, it depends if you're lucky, but a post-production accountant is also important because a lot of people will have a production accountant and they pretty much just finish once production stops. But there's still a very large amount of money being spent on the film in post, and the director, or producer, whoever's in charge is responsible for doing that if they don't have a post accountant. And the post accountant is super important. If you're working on, like I mentioned, one of these like $10 million indies or even a 5 million or a couple million, the post production accountant is talking to the producers pretty much on a daily basis. It's a really involved position that I think is often overlooked. And then another one is the post-production supervisor. A lot of indie films, sub-million, won't be able to have one. It is really important, I think, if you can afford it. It's a great person to have on set because not only are they helping just manage the whole entire process, but they also are utilizing a lot of their contacts. For example, say if you need an online editor, but you don't really know what an online editor is, the the post-production supervisor probably knows a bunch of them, or even a colorist or VFX assistant editor. Post-production supervisor, someone that just oversees post-production and is pretty much like the one-stop shop for all questions and all logistical things. And that's, I would say, at least everything I could think of right now. There's, again, maybe hundreds of other people working on bigger
Right.
films, but for a smaller film, I think that if you have all these positions, that you'd be in great shape.
Yeah. Like each of these categories for, like F1, which got nominated for an Oscar, could ease like VFX alone on F1 is probably 200 people.
Exactly. So it really could change even something like a colorist or like a sound department. If you're watching the Oscars or Golden Globes and you see like best sound design, that's probably a huge team of people. Where if it's a few $100,000 indie, it might just be one person or a handful of people working on the sound.
Okay, cool. And then quick follow-up, just, like just looking back to like our pre-production talk, whenever that sometime in 2025, which at this point feels like 1,000 years ago. But how early on in the process of like getting a film together do you think it's a good idea to try to find an editor and maybe a post-production supervisor?
I
Um,
would say as early as possible. So a lot of people will just think an editor is sitting in front of a computer pressing buttons, but an editor is very much a collaborative and creative position. So there might be certain things that an editor is can even read in the script and be like, hey, you know what? I'm just reading this and thinking that it's going to be a little bit difficult to edit this scene. Like maybe you could change some of this. So that's something that can totally happen in the script phase. At the very least, I would say to have an editor before you actually start shooting. Like it's not, I wouldn't really advise just having your film completely shot and then trying to find an editor. Because if you have an editor on board while you're actually shooting, you could be sending them dailies and sending them the footage, and they could be looking at it and like, hey, you know what? There's an issue with this. Like, why don't you try to do this a little bit better? I remember for the most recent film I directed, Plan B, I like to use a lot of improv for some of the comedy scenes, and we'd get the script, get the scene done, and then do like one or two takes with some added in stuff from the actors. And I remember the editor called me because we were editing as we shot, and she was like, "Hey, you know what? Like some of this stuff you're getting is really funny, but like you gotta you got to do a better way of like capturing everything because when you're only shooting with one camera and you're doing improv scenes, there's certain things that we just didn't have. Like for example, one of the characters might say something, but we might not have a shot reacting to that. And that's something as myself at the time as a first time feature director wasn't necessarily thinking about. And then when our editor, uh, whose name is Colleen, told me that, I said, okay, you know what? Like, luckily you told me while we're still shooting because now for everything else we shoot, I will make sure that we're getting what we need.
yeah, and that leads.
And I was just going to say kind of the same thing for post-production supervisor, because again, that's someone who can help find your editor if you don't really know anyone. And it's also someone who can just help assemble that team. And the earlier you can bring everyone on, the better, I would say.
All right, cool. And then, to a degree, this kind of leads into my next question, which is, how often do we need reshoots, which oh God, what a nightmare. Or ADR, slightly less bad nightmare, but still annoying.
So I would say reshoots, like needing is kind of a strong word because like and no movie is perfect. So any movie can be better from a reshoot, I think. Like if you have the finished film and you're like, hey, you know what? Wouldn't it be better if we had this in that scene? Like, yeah, it would, but is it really worth spending however much money you have to spend in order to do that? I would say for the most part, no on an indie film under $1 million, just because that could be tens of thousands of dollars just in one day. You're flying out the actors, you're hiring the crew, maybe you're housing some of the crew. So it can be super expensive. I would always say to avoid it if possible. But if it's a studio film, a lot of times they're actually anticipating like 1 or 2 reshoot days and they may even be budgeting for it. So it's not the end of the world if you have to do a reshoot. Like I mentioned, my film Plan B, we did not do any reshoots, thankfully, but I also mentioned Hereditary, which was like a $5.5 million movie. Still very much an indie though, and we did do multiple reshoot days for that film. And it's really just to the point where you're watching the film and you might do some test screenings, and there could be a scene or even a line or something that's just really confusing and not really hitting the audience the way that it should. And then a reshoot might be necessary. You also brought up ADR, which again, a little bit less of a nightmare. A lot of times now, especially if you are working with SAG actors, there is like maybe an ADR day in the contract. So you'll get 1 or maybe even 2 ADR days with your cash. And I would say that ADR is almost always necessary. I don't think I've ever worked on a movie that didn't use at least some ADR. Nowadays, it's also just so easy to actually do, especially if you're working with a good post sound team. I remember for Plan B, I had some ADR from our cast, and it's really just as easy as like recording some audio on your iPhone nowadays. And obviously, you'll have to write the lines or whatever it is. Sometimes they're done for technical reasons, like maybe for whatever reason, the sound that you recorded on set just doesn't really sound great. Maybe there's some background noise, maybe there's a dog barking or a lawnmower outside or something. That kind of stuff does happen. And a lot of it can be fixed in post, but sometimes it just can't. Then there also might be some ADR that's for creative reasons. Similar to the reshoot, there might be some scene or piece of dialogue or something that's either just missing or isn't really um, isn't really hitting the audience the way that it should. And you're like, you know what? If this character said this, it would be a lot easier. And sometimes you can do it with like a character off screen. Maybe it's a conversation. You can just show one character reacting and just place in a new line for the character speaking off screen. That's an easy way to do it. It's obviously not as good looking just because you're not seeing the character speak. But yeah, it's pretty much necessary, I think, in all features.
All right, cool. And then just in case anybody is listening to this, either currently or in the future on the recording, who has never heard the term ADR before, I should have defined this before I asked the question, but what is ADR?
So I'd say the process of ADR is actually just recording audio after production. So I honestly always forget like the actual word. I always like want to think it's like additional dialogue recording, but I know that that's not actually what it means.
That's one of
Um,
those like Mandela effect things, because that's how I've always known it too. But
yeah, so it's actually automated dialogue replacement is like the technical.
oh,
But yeah, for some reason I always thought it was additional dialogue recording, and I remember seeing it at some point, like, really, that's what it stands for? But automated dialogue replacement. And again, it's essentially just audio that is done after the fact. So it could be, like I said, technical or creative, but you want your actors to say some piece of dialogue that you don't have. You'll potentially, if it's a lot, you might have to like get them in a recording studio and actually record everything. And if it's just like 1 or 2 lines, you might be able just to say like, hey, would you mind recording this? And nowadays, a lot of actors have mics because they're doing a lot of like remote interviews and podcasts and things like that. Or iPhone or any kind of smartphone, they now all have pretty good mics. So if they're in a quiet room, you might even be able to get away with that.
all right, cool. I love it. I love it. Okay, so this is one of those questions that's gonna like vary so widely depending on the kind of movie. So for purposes of this discussion, let's say we're making a reasonably budgeted indie, like 1.5 mil and under, about and with like minimal special effects, if any. So about how long can post-production take? That's
So, yeah, like you kind of said, everything can be different. Every film is going to be different. I would say for something like that, under 1.5, the difference from like 1.5 and 300,000 could be major, but a lot of indies can take up to a year, maybe even a little bit more to actually finish the entire process, where studios will do films much faster. And there are also like million, 1.5 million studio movies. Like for example, there's a lot of Christmas movies. I know Hallmark does a ton of them now, where they're filmed in the summer, like June, July, or August, and they're somehow already released in December. And that gives them like 4 months to actually do the entire process. Even other films that are backed by a studio might have a set release date at the time of filming, and that's a little bit more of a rush. If you're an indie filmmaker and you're more in control of the process, you can really take as long as you want. It's obviously good and exciting to get your film out there into the world, but there might not be anyone stopping you from taking an extra like 6 months where if there's a studio or a financier, like a bigger producer on board, they might say, hey, this is when you need to deliver the film to me. And you're delivering whatever version of the film you have at that point. So just do your best to get it done on that date. But yeah, I would say probably anywhere from 6 months to a year is
that's
probably the average.
that sounds
Maybe
pretty.
even maybe like 8 months to a year. 6 months is pretty quick, but it can always change.
Yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
All right. And then next kind of question, because if there's one way to give editors or like post-production supervisors hives, it's to say, "Oh, we'll fix it in post," and they just they hate it so much. So what are some issues that, you have either encountered yourself or that you've heard tale of that arose in post that like, we could have fixed this in pre-production or production if only we had known. So like what should, first-time filmmakers kind of be cognizant of as they're planning and actually shooting the movie to hopefully make post-production as smooth and straightforward as humanly possible.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think super helpful for everyone listening. So I'm happy that you not only mentioned production, but also pre-production, because so many of these things can be fixed in pre-production. So I'd say at least on set, do whatever you can on set to make sure everything is as good as possible. If you're recording something and you happen to hear like a little buzz from the refrigerator or something like that, like cut and try to figure out what it is and actually remove the sound. Sound issues can be easily fixed on set. A lot of sound designers or sound like production sound mixers will say that they're wearing the headphones. They're like, "Hey, I'm picking up a buzz. Like, we need to do something about that." Or um, or then it even goes as far as actual pre-production. I said before that it's sometimes important to have an editor or post team on board in the script process. There are so many things that I say that could be fixed in a script that a lot of filmmakers just don't necessarily think about. You've worked on your script for a long time, you start hiring your crew, you're very excited, and you don't really want to be in the writing phase anymore. You want to be focused on actually producing your film. But before you get to that point, try to make sure your script is as tight as possible. I would say to go through the script line by line, and anything that's not needed, just get rid of it. Because there's a lot of, well, not a lot. Every movie has certain scenes or takes or things like that that are cut and don't end up making it in the movie. That's inevitable and it's going to obviously happen. But at the same time, there's a lot of things I would say that are in the script that seem really important to you as you're filming this movie. And then when you actually have the edit, maybe they just don't really work the way as you should, or maybe it just wasn't necessary in the first place. I see in a lot of comedies, which is really pretty much all that I do, comedy films, is that there might be a scene that's really funny, but it does not advance the story at all. In a comedy movie, every scene should advance the film and every joke should somehow tie into the story. There should never really be a scene that's only funny and doesn't really go into the story at all. And those are the kind of scenes that ultimately get cut. And when you think about it, you might spend 6 hours filming the scene, and that's 6 hours you could have had somewhere else had you actually cut that scene beforehand. And besides the time factor, you're paying everyone to be there. So you're paying all these actors, you're paying all of the crew members, you're paying to feed all of them, to house all of them. So the shorter and more tight you can make your script, the better. So I would say that's my biggest piece of advice is just to really go through the script and make sure that it's as, when I say as short as possible, you don't want it to be like a short film, but there's a lot of, I would say, hour and 50-minute movies that could probably be hour and 30 or hour and 35-minute movies. And those films will be significantly cheaper to shoot.
Yeah. We want to avoid what I call the plot cul-de-sac, where we're going along, this thing happens, and then we exit the thing, we're back on the main thread, and we never come back.
Exactly. There's a couple other things I figured I'd mention too here. And this is advice have had before and wish that I had from the very beginning before I ever even worked on a film. Um, so one is to make sure you have enough money to finish post-production.
Oh, yeah.
That's really important because I mentioned delivery. Like something like delivering your film to a distributor, if you're an independent film, could cost upwards of $15,000 or so. And most people don't realize that. And you might get an offer from a distributor and maybe they're going to pay you an MG, which is an upfront minimum guarantee, or maybe it's a straight distribution deal. But regardless, if you don't have money to deliver your film to them, like for example, you might need to pay to get a trailer, trailer, poster, an MPA rating, which is the like rated R, rated PG-13 thing that comes up before the film. That can cost over like two to $3,000. There's also just a bunch of other random legal things that you need. E&O insurance is like $5,000 and you need that. So there's so many costs that come up after the film is completely finished in your eyes. So budget for those things beforehand. Really important. While you're on set, try to shoot some stills that will eventually be used for the movie poster because that's something that a lot of filmmakers don't think of. And if you end up not shooting any stills specifically for the poster, it puts the distributor in a tough spot because they don't really have that much to work with. You could potentially call your actors back in and do like a photo shoot with them. Not super likely, but what's going to most likely happen is the distributor is going to hire someone to go through the film or at least use the stills that you pull out that are essentially screenshots of the film and Photoshop them and make a poster. And maybe you'll get lucky and it'll look really good. A lot of times it won't look nearly as, actually, all the time, I would say it's not going to look as good as if you had like posed photos. A lot of big studio movies that have these famous iconic poses, like a Pretty Woman or something like that. Like I'm sure that those were like scheduled photo shoot or promo shoot that they did for those films. So I've personally haven't done that for some films, and I've been involved with some films that have. I would recommend it because especially now with all of the films that are out there, the market is pretty much flooded with independent films, and they're not really as valuable as they were previously, like going back 3, 4, 5 or more years. That that could like make or break a film. Like when if you have a sales agent and they're pitching your film, they're often just showing the trailer and the poster. And if it looks appealing to the buyer, they'll say, "Oh, that looks good. Um, I'll take a screener of that." If the poster's not good, it really is going to hurt your film. So, like for as little work or as much work as you're spending on the movie, at least focus on the poster a little bit. I would say focus on it a lot. And the trailer for your film as well, if you can, budget for a trailer. If you get a really good trailer, it could cost upwards of $20,000. I would say it's worth it, regardless of what you're spending on the film. If the trailer's not good, people aren't going to want to watch it. So many people will just look at the poster, look at the trailer. If it looks good, they'll watch it. If it doesn't, then they probably won't watch it. And the same goes for a distributor or sales agent who's buying it. A lot of that just goes about like, is the poster good? And is the trailer good? So those are things that are super important. You can anticipate in pre-production, tackle it in production, and then when you get to the point of actually having a finished film, you'll have those assets, and it will make your film much more sellable.
All right, cool. I love it. So much of this series comes back to like anticipate it and have the conversation in pre-production. Like,
Yeah, and usually you won't ever know to anticipate it until it happens to you. Or like, oh man, why did I not think of this? I feel like I've been through a lot now that I'll never be able to be ready for everything. But I think most of the things that pop up, I at least have probably dealt with or heard of people dealing with before.
right. It's not like a total, oh my gosh, what's happening? I've never heard of this in my life.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So in terms of like, trying to get a team together, Do you have any advice on like how to find an editor? Like, let's just presume that somebody is a first-time filmmaker. Somehow the money is coming together to make this film. Maybe we've got like a line producer on board, we've got another producer to help us make it, but nobody has an editor like just in their back pocket ready to go. How does one find an editor? Do you just go to a coffee shop and go, is anyone an editor? And hope someone raises their hand?
So there's a bunch of different ways you can find an editor. One, I'd say, depending on the size of your team, if you have a post supervisor, you have producers on board, talk to them and see like, hey, do you guys know any editors? Is there anyone you worked with that you'd recommend? It's always good getting someone who's personally recommended.
Mhm.
If you don't really have that as an option, or maybe you just want to see who else is out there, make a list of some movies that you would aspire to be like. Like, say, if you're making like a $500,000 movie, you might not want to think of like Iron Man or some huge budget movie. But say if you're making like a $500,000 movie and there's like some other movie that's in your budget range that's a similar genre that was at like a good film festival like Sundance or really whatever you're aspiring to be like. Like, for example, my film Plan B that I directed, I was very much looking at comparable films in terms of like sub $3 million comedies that had played at more prestige festivals like a Tribeca or South by Southwest or Sundance. So those were the kind of people that I was looking for in terms of partners for the film, people who had worked on films like that. So I would say to do something like that. Like if you have a horror film, try to find someone who has edited horror films, comedy films, some edited comedy films. So in terms of finding them, you can just, again, make a list of these films, look at the credits, and go online and try to find them. A lot of these editors will have contact info on IMDb Pro. If you don't have IMDb Pro, it's 100% worth it. It might be like 120 or $150 or something like that a year. And this is not a sponsor. Not pretty much, everybody in the industry uses it. So it's totally worth it. If you don't have it, even just get the free trial and really max out that free trial and try to write down as many emails as you can. If they don't have their direct contact info, you can often find an agent or a manager. A lot of editors do have them, and you can just reach out to them. Sometimes you'll get people being pitched to you. You might be able to like reach out to an agency, like one of the bigger ones, like a CAA or WME or something, and say, "Hey, can you send us a list of editors who are available right now?" And they'll often send you a list. That's not only for editors. You can do that for a lot of department heads, production designers, cinematographers, things like that. And sometimes it could just even be in weird ways. Like for example, on my film Plan B, our editor Colleen Halsey actually reached out to me, and she had edited Edward Scissorhands and like really huge movies. So I was thinking of editing this film myself, just due to budgetary reasons. But the editors that I was talking to were people who had either been like an assistant editor on a TV show, for the most part, people who had never edited a feature before, and I was planning to like be very hands-on and be in the editing room with them. And then I randomly got an email or call from an agent who said like, "Hey, one of my actor clients auditioned for your film, and we also have this editor who I shared the script with, and she loves it and wants to do it." And I was like, I looked at her credits and was thinking like, "There's no way we could afford this editor."
She's
And the agent yeah, the agent said, she really likes the script. So like let us know what you're budgeting and she's gonna do it. I was like, okay, awesome. And then we ended up getting Colleen, who was great. And then after Colleen, this shows how collaborative the editing process is. And Colleen was great, and she has a home editing suite at her house, and we edited out of there. And I was in LA doing that for a bit. And her husband is an Oscar nominated or Oscar winning editor, actually. He edited Rocky back in the day. So it was great having them on board. And her husband Richard was super helpful too, and he'd like pop in the editing suite and give some notes on the film and things like that. Um, then when I said how important it is for getting an editor who's experienced in the genre, Colleen hadn't done a ton of like R-rated comedies. So there were certain things that like maybe her taste for comedy wasn't exactly in our target audience, and she also didn't have a ton of experience editing like improv takes that we didn't really have a script supervisor for. And at that point, I ended up getting a second, we called him a supervising editor who came on after the fact, and he really helped with a lot of the comedy. So he came in and really helped tighten up the film. He helped cut a lot of time out because that was one of the issues. The earlier cuts were a lot longer. And there were certain jokes that were not in the script that Colleen and I couldn't really get to work into the film due to like coverage issues. And our other supervising editor, Seth Clark is his name, he came in and he, I think, made everything work. If something was funny and I wanted it in the film because of Seth, it's actually in the film. And he's someone who had done comedy specials and was an editor on Arrested Development. I actually met him through the lead actress of the film, Jamie Lee, because she does a lot of comedy and is a producer on TV shows, had worked with Seth. And when she saw the cut, she said, like, I really think you should talk to Seth and he'll help make the film better. And he did.
That's awesome. What a fortuitous combination of events of like people who know people, and somehow the team gets together. But
Exactly. I went from potentially editing this film myself when I've edited like short films and things like that that I've made, but I've never actually worked as an editor. I'm not a trained editor. So I went from that to using a very experienced editing team, which was great.
yeah.
And I also wanted to say too, I threw it in there a little bit in my rant I just went on, but a script supervisor is extremely important during the production process. I would say make sure you have one. I talked about my film Plan B a little bit, and I did not have a script supervisor, and it ended up like creating a huge headache in post production because when I'm on set, I'm thinking, we're trying to cut costs. I think when we were going through the budget, I had a script supervisor, and someone might have suggested, yeah, you can probably cut that. And we ended up cutting the script supervisor. The script supervisor is really helping to prevent continuity errors. So
Mhm.
if you ever see a film and maybe there's like a dinner scene and there's a glass of water, and then the next take it's like filled up more than it was before, that's something that a good script supervisor will prevent. And it's inevitable. It is going to happen, especially in an indie where there might be things like that. But a script supervisor as you're filming is going through the script and like marking up any new words that the actor might throw in, or maybe the actor mixes up a line. The script supervisor is taking notes of all of this and sending it to the editor. So the editor is looking at like this lined script from the script supervisor and it's helping edit the film much more efficiently. So I didn't have a script supervisor on that film and it created a lot of headaches. So I definitely would never produce another movie that doesn't have one. And I guess unless it's like really micro budget and you can't afford it, but it's totally worth it. It also makes the actors working in the scene much more comfortable. I remember on Plan B, some of the cast wasn't thrilled when they realized I didn't have one. Um, and we ended up like trying to get a makeshift script supervisor, and it just isn't as good as having someone who's really experienced. So, script supervisor, super important.
Like borrow a PA who's like, well, you have attention to detail. You can kind of figure this
Exactly. I did. I remember doing that at one point, and it's not the same.
out. Say, yeah,
Yeah,
because
get a script supervisor who has actually been a script supervisor on a feature before.
yeah. Because I used to tell, 'cause I also run the internship program at Roadmap, and I had a couple of interns who, like one summer actually got a job as a PA on some independent film filming in Denver. And I was like, please go do that. Like, we'll figure out your internship sh work hours outside of that, but like, do not miss out on this opportunity. Go be the PA. And they come back like on Saturday, when they're not on set, and they're like, wow, a good first AD and a good script supervisor really does make a difference. And I was like, yep, they sure do.
It really does. I'm working on a feature right now, actually, that I'm producing that's currently in production, and there's a great first AD, great script supervisor, and it makes the set run way better.
So much smoother. So much smoother. Okay, cool. Well, into sort of the final question from me, and then we can take questions from the writers, because I'm sure they have some, especially if nobody's ever worked in post-production before, because then they're like, the movie fairies just turn this into a movie somehow, some way. Magic happens. Do you have any advice for filmmakers who maybe want to edit the film themselves? So, like, what was kind of your thought process when you were thinking about doing that? And let's
So
just say
I would
they have some degree of editing experience. Like maybe they're not an editor, but they've edited something before.
Yeah, so I would say to always avoid it unless there's some like really. famous and successful filmmakers who might be able to do it. You might be like the Coen brothers or something. Like I think maybe they edit their own films. I'm honestly not even sure, but I know there's some filmmakers that do it, or like a Sean Baker or someone like that.
Yeah.
Um, but if you're just like a regular filmmaker or a first time feature director, I wouldn't do it unless you have to due to budgetary reasons. But even that, you might be able to find someone who's like a recent college grad who maybe isn't working yet, or maybe is free on the weekends or nights or something, and might be able to help you. So I've said this earlier in this webinar, but editing might be technical in terms of like knowing how to use software, but it's also a very creative and collaborative position. I think some of that is even apparent from what I was just saying about the editors I work with on my film Plan B, in terms of Colleen and more importantly Seth, who came on later and really helped with punching up the film and really making a lot of these jokes land. So it's great to have someone sitting next to you who you can collaborate with. And so that person will tell you if something's working or something's not working. There could be something that maybe you wrote in the script that you just think in your head is funny, and maybe it's not. Or if it's a horror film, maybe there's something that you wrote that you thought would be scary and it's not. And just because it's in the script, you think you need to leave it in the film. It's really not the case at all. If something's not working, it really should be removed. And it's good to have someone to really push you to do that. If you do insist on editing the film yourself, or whether you're even whether if you are like a really successful like Sean Baker type person, or if you're just a first time filmmaker who doesn't have money to pay an editor, I would say something that's really important is to have people watch the film, watch versions of the film while you're still editing, and make cuts based on that. So it could be your mom, it could be a friend, it could be a neighbor, it could be some random person you found online. It could also be people who work in the industry. If you're a director, you could have other filmmaker friends. You could have some of the actors look at it. Anyone who is working on the crew, people who are in your target audience. Like if you have a horror film, try to find people who really like horror films and have them sign an NDA and have them watch a film and fill out a Q&A. So pretty much every film I've been involved with does this. Uh, for example, even like a slightly bigger independent film like Hereditary. I remember when we were in post on that film, there was a few different test screenings we did. We had one big one in New York that was like in our the post house we were doing. There's like a theater in there, and a lot of the team we called in pretty much like industry friends and industry contacts. So we had other, that's a horror film. So we had like other established horror directors and filmmakers in there, other producers, people who were actively working in the industry. That was, I believe, the first time anyone was ever really seeing it that wasn't involved with the film. And then even after that happened, I remember setting up like a local to where I was living and working at the time, like a local screening with like random people that we found online, and had like a little, pretty much a house screening of it, and had them all sign NDAs. And these were just random people, people that were not associated with the film, that do not work in the industry. And some of that stuff really helps. I remember actually that screening we had for Hereditary, there was one that I set up, and it was just like random people. And Alex Wolff, who plays the son in the movie, there's maybe one or multiple scenes where he's crying. And a few of the people said, like, that cry he does is like way too much. It's really annoying. And now when you watch the movie, that cry is not that annoying anymore. I just actually watched Hereditary recently for the first time in like a couple years, and the cry was totally normal. And I was like, oh, I forgot that we toned that down.
We had to
And
change
I,
it.
I really think that was because of some of these test screenings. And those are the things that like don't seem super important. And who knows, the movie could have came out and no one ever would have mentioned that uh, cry being slightly annoying. Or there was another scene where like there's a dog in Hereditary and it's like barking a lot. I remember someone saying like that dog was really annoying and like took me out of the scene. And now you can't hear the dog barking in the movie anymore. And the dog in Hereditary is like barely even in it anymore. People that watch the movie, you don't even realize there's a dog. And that might have been a slightly bigger film, but something like my film I directed, Plan B, I did so many test screenings for that. Sometimes, if you have the budget, like Hereditary, maybe you can pay people or like order a pizza or something. I don't really remember what we did for that movie. But for Plan B, I went on Facebook. I joined a local town group that I lived in, posted. I didn't say that I made a film because people are always going to be biased if they know you directed it or whatever. If you're an actor and you're in the film, like nothing you can really do. But I said I work for a production company and I'm involved with like this movie that they're doing. Or I might even have said I work for like a marketing firm and we're helping set up a screening for this film. I forget exactly what I said, but it didn't have credits in it, so there's like nothing tied me to this film. And I had people come over to my parents' house because they're my apartment, no one could fit in there, but at least at the time, my parents let me use their living room and I could fit maybe 7 people in there. And I probably had at least like a dozen of these screenings over the course of like 2 weeks, where I remember I was at Colleen's house and we were editing the film. And then we're like, let's take like 2 weeks off to do some test screenings. And we did that. And then we got a bunch of notes on these Q&A papers that I created, just asking specific questions about the film. And then I conducted these Q&As in person as if they didn't know I was involved with the film. So they were not biased at all. And they were not hesitant to like talk bad about the film because they didn't know that I directed it. So I would say always do test screenings. Very important. Also in Plan B. I'll say this too. There's a scene. The movie involves a pregnancy, and the baby that we had looked older than a newborn baby. And this was something that came up in every single test screening. And we were able to make the baby look a little bit like a newborn in post. It's like the same baby, but we were able to shrink the baby a little bit in post. And that's VFX that I was not anticipating doing, but it's something that came up on every single test screening almost, especially the women that were watching it. A lot of the men didn't realize, but kept coming up. And I was like, you know what? This is the final scene of the movie, and it's about a pregnancy. We can't have this big baby being the last thing people see and what they remember. So we spent a decent amount of money making sure that that baby looked like a real baby, a newborn baby. And I'll say that I've read pretty much every review of that movie online, and no one's ever mentioned the baby looking too big. So VFX House did a great job with that. And that came
Sad.
from test screenings.
Yeah. Because that is one of those things that occasionally I've noticed that in a film or TV show where I'm like, that baby is at least 6 months old. There's no
Yeah,
way.
that's pretty much what we had. And it might have been like a 5 or 6 month old baby, but it even looked older.
Yeah.
And we made it look younger. And it doesn't look like a very newborn baby because we didn't want to like overdo it, but
Right.
it looks like it was a real baby. It was an actual baby actor. It was just somehow they were able to take the baby that we used and make it a little bit smaller. Yeah,
So
like condense it.
there's some magic. Again, like the movie fairies happen. Like all of the people, who work in like departments other than anything I've ever done, I'm always like, I don't understand your job. Um, just because I don't have that eye, but bless them. Thank God for them. Just go with that. Um, okay, cool. So going to questions from the writers. So writers, remember questions go into the Q&A box so that I can find them and then mark them as answered, and it just helps me stay all organized. So George is asking, and then I'm sure that this varies a lot, but in your experience, do editors charge per day? How much how much money are we talking to have somebody edit?
Again, it really depends on like the experience of the editor. You might be able to find a recent college grad who's willing to do it for free or for very little money or close to minimum wage. There's probably some editors for big studio movies that cost 10,000, 20,000 a week.
Mhm.
For the most part, I think from my experiences, most editors don't charge by the day, they'll charge by the week. And maybe for a lower budget movie, you could find someone to work in like the $1,000 to $2,000, 1,000 to 2,500 a week range. Again, you might be able to get someone to work for less, like if it's a really good script, or maybe like right now, for example, things are super slow, and there might just be an editor who's not doing anything, and they think, I usually charge 3,000 a week, but I'm not doing anything else, so I'll do this for 1,500 a week. So again, it just comes down to the experience of the editor. Usually there's a weekly rate. I guess there could be a daily rate if, say, the edit's essentially finished and you might need like an additional editor to come on just for like a day or two. Then it would obviously be a daily rate that you can work out with the editor. It could be a couple $100s, it could be more if they're more experienced. And then you also might be able to find someone who will just come on as like an editor with a flat fee. for something that's super low budget, and maybe you're like a film school grad and you know someone who's an editor or trying to be an editor, you could be like, hey, I'll give you a couple $1,000 and you can just edit the film. You might be able to find that too for someone who's looking to like, I would say, get their feet wet and edit a feature for the first time.
Mhm. Yeah. Everyone needs to like have things on their resume in order to get get this thing going. Um, okay, cool. So next question is from a writer who wasn't able to attend. So they emailed me their question and then I found it. Because I was like,
Great.
wait, where did I put it? And then I found it. So what is the importance of color correction? Because this is a bit more of a modern problem that we have with filming with digital cameras. But what is like color correction? What is a colorist? Basically, like why do we have to do this?
Color correction is very, very important. If you're ever on a set, directing a film or producing or even just working on a set, if you happen to see what the like the raw footage looks like without color correction, it's very bland. It's really not very pretty to look at. A lot of editors, or not even editors, well, yeah, editors, cinematographers, like when you're looking at the monitor on set, there's often what's called a camera LUT is on there, and it will make it look good, but it's just temporary. Like there's certain things in the edit, well, I'll say in the color process where a colorist is going through specifically and be like, okay, this scene looks a little too like blue or looks too cool or like it's overall it's too warm, things like that. I'm not the most technical filmmaker, so I'm not going to be someone who's super, I'd say, familiar with all of these colorist terms. But I remember when we were coloring Plan B, there were certain things where I'm like, yeah, like this is like too blue. Can you do something to like bring this down? And then the colorist would say yes and give me some kind of uh, technical response for it. It's really important. If you're fortunate enough to bring a colorist on in pre-production, they can help with that LUT that you're looking at while you're actually on set. Usually you're not really paying a colorist for any of that stuff, but if you like hire them in advance, it's just like a perk and it will make their job in post easier. So I would say to hire them in pre-production if you're fortunate enough to. Oftentimes you're not. But again, it's definitely important because they're controlling the whole look, and one scene that's not colored correctly isn't going to look good. There's also a quality control process that happens when you're delivering a film to a distributor. And whether you're a studio film or an independent film, like this is going to happen regardless, depending on who your distributor is or where the film like lives in the world. If it's coming out on like one of the, say like Tubi, for example, like maybe if you're just distributing directly on Tubi through like an aggregator, the QC process might not be as thorough as if you're like delivering a film to Netflix or something like that. I've seen all different kinds of QCs, but if the color's not good, it's not going to pass QC. You're going to get a QC report and it's going to have all of these color issues. I remember even a film like Hereditary had some that's done with like a totally professional Oscar-winning editor on her Oscar nominated. I don't really remember, but she was at least the editor. Jen Lame was nominated or won an Oscar for Manchester by the Sea. But something like Plan B, for example, there was a lot of things on this QC report that are like random technical things saying like, hey, the color here is not consistent within the scene. And maybe if you're watching a scene, even though you've seen it hundreds of times through the editing process, there might just be something you miss or don't pick up on. Or maybe it was from a different take and the lighting outside changed or the lighting in the room changed, but it's just a little bit inconsistent. And sometimes it sneaks by. You might see a movie streaming somewhere or even in a theater and the color looks a little bit different in a certain scene. Or maybe it's an outside scene and it's like slightly darker than it was in the previous shot. Those are things that a good colorist can fix for the most part. But again, if it is a different take and it's later in the day, it's never going to be 100% consistent. But those are the kind of things that a colorist can do.
All right, cool. I love it. All right, so George has a question. So, like just general advice, but I would also say, talk to a line producer. So George is asking if I have a budget of $200,000, all in for the whole project, how much should I be allowing for post-production?
Okay, so that's definitely can totally vary. I would say put a decent chunk of it in. And it's kind of the biggest way that I would do it. Beforehand, at least all of the things I mentioned that are aspects of post-production, editing, color correction, sound design, all of those things. Before you actually start shooting, start reaching out to potential people who you can work with. Reach out to editors, reach out to colorists, sound designers, and get their rates. Because again, it really can vary. You might have a sound design team who might cost $100,000 for something that's like a $200,000 budget. Like maybe you could find someone who could do it for like 10,000 or 15,000, maybe a little bit less if it's again someone new. But for sound design, you don't really want to cut any corners because again, you're going to have to pass QC and you're going to have to deliver the film. You need someone who is capable of giving you a 5:1 mix, which is standard now to do a 5:1 audio mix. But if it's like a recent college grad and they're going to be doing their first film, like maybe they don't have the tools or at least like the studio to be able to do a 5.1 mix. So definitely ask a lot of questions and get rates. And I would say to it's again, it's tough to give you a set number, but my advice would be to rewatch this video. You'll get the link, and if you were taking notes, great. Go through all of the different people that I mentioned and try to reach out to people, get quotes, and then budget whatever that is. And again, you don't really want to cut any corners, but $200,000 budget, you're not going to have a post-production supervisor, most likely, unless you find someone who's just like a friend that's going to do it for free. You're not going to have a post-production accountant. There might be some other things that you aren't going to have either. Maybe you're editing the film yourself, and that will save you some money, but you are going to need a colorist unless you happen to also be a colorist, can do it yourself. You're going to need a sound designer. You're going to need some money to deliver the film as well. So that's important. You can do some research. Maybe there's some YouTube videos where you can look up exactly what you need to do the legal delivery. Like I said, it could cost upwards of $10,000 or 15,000, probably at least 10,000 because you are getting E&O insurance no matter what, and that's about $5,000. So, um, and again, a trailer, if you get a good trailer, that could cost $20,000. If you know how to cut trailers yourself, you might be able to. Maybe you have a friend that does trailers, movie poster. These are all things that are expensive. You might be able to find some discounts. But again, in my opinion, don't cut corners in terms of the trailer or poster. Like pay someone to do them if you're not capable of doing one that's really good yourself, because that's what people are going to see.
Cool. And then George, I think if you're planning, because I know George he's based in the UK. I don't know if he's planning to make this film in the UK. Maybe he wants to make it elsewhere. But there might, because one thing that like the UK seems to have that we don't have nearly as much of in the state is from what I understand, there's a fair amount of like government sponsored like grants and programs. Like there's resources that they have there for filmmakers that maybe we have here in the States, but just to a slightly more like state by state degree as opposed to like a federal degree. Um, so, maybe try to look into those kinds of things because there might be some stuff there that's also able to help you out.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have a ton of experience in terms of grants. I am working on a documentary right now where we did partner with a charity to get some funding. The documentary revolves around cancer, and we got some funding from a cancer charity, which is great. So you could try to find different organizations like that that might be able to do it. And I don't have a ton of experience with grants, but tax credits are something I am experienced in. So in the U.S., film industry, I won't go into a lot of detail because we are coming up to an ending here, but tax credits are something that I have heard so many independent filmmakers just don't even know what they are and they do not use them. It's a lot of work to be able to actually get a tax credit and manage all of that. I did it for Plan B, and there's really not that many, I would say, like films in our budget range that are doing that. A lot of filmmakers just don't even try. But if you do everything right, you're going to get the tax credit. And like New Jersey, for example, which is where I shot Plan B, it's a 35% credit. So if you make the film for $1 million and you spend $1 million in New Jersey and you do everything by the books in the right way, you're going to get a credit that's $350,000, which is a lot of money, and that will go a long way. It's again a lot of work. You do have to pay people, like pay a CPA and things like that, but very well worth it. So shoot in a place where there is a tax credit and invest in the resources to be able to get the credit and hire people that have gotten the credit before.
You got this, George. Call us when the movie's done. Oh, we got through like nearly all of the webinar without a cough, and then right at the end. All right. Well, I don't think we have any other questions from anybody. Um, so I think we can set them all free. Because now I don't know if anybody listening is like necessarily wants to be an editor themselves, but now at least we kind of have an understanding. Oh, hold on. Closing question from George, and then we'll close out. So George is asking really quick, were you scared before making your first film? How did you get over it?
I was definitely scared before, I'd say, directing my first film. Just being, I was on a set a bunch of times, whether I was working as a PA or even working as, like I said, an associate producer on Hereditary. I would say you have to get over it by really just doing it. Try to prep as much as you can. The actors, for example, try to talk to them as much as you can before you're actually shooting. Have conversations with all the department heads. But ultimately, it is a scary thing. But as the director, you really need to show them you're in charge. My first film I directed, Plan B, there's definitely a lot of things that I would do differently now. If I was directing another film, I would do things differently. And there's a lot of things I learned that I remember. Maybe there was an issue that popped up on like day 2 or 3 of shooting that film. We shot for 15 days and I didn't really handle it that great. And then I remember there's times where it's later on in that same shoot, maybe day 13 or 14 or 15, where there was a problem and I handled something like I made a important decision like without any like prep time or anything. I was like, this is what we're doing, and it ended up working. And there's like crew members or actors coming up to me after, like, wow, that was really impressive that you did that. Like that made the film better and really helped all of us out. So just prep as much as you can, and yeah, that's pretty much it. It's going to be scary though, but you'll you'll get over it. And George or anyone else listening, like you could feel free to follow my company on social media at Joke Zero Comedy. Jokezero.com is the website, and all the links are on there. We're always posting resources. We have a podcast that I produced along with the making of Plan B. So this came out when Plan B was being released. It was a 20 episode first season. Every episode has a member of the cast or crew on the film. And they're not only talking about Plan B, but it's pretty much like how'd you get started in the industry, um, different stories from past films they've worked on, past projects, and then ultimately behind the scenes making of Plan B. It's not only, I think, entertaining, but super educational because we have so many different people on, not only actors, but we have on crew members. And if you're curious about like I would say cinematography. Our cinematographer's on an episode. We had an intimacy coordinator who came on, an animal trainer, things that you don't necessarily hear from all the time, or positions you don't necessarily hear from. So I would say recommend checking that out. And I'm also pretty accessible. I'm on LinkedIn. If you shoot me a message on LinkedIn and it's like a nice, polite message, I'll usually get back to you.
All right, cool. I love it. George says, thank you both so much. And then Matt in the chat says, great insight for a screenwriter to think about in pre-production. Winky smiley face.
Good. Yeah,
So we,
George, happy to answer your questions. I hope I did. And yeah, I see a couple other messages coming in now. Yeah, Matt, happy to give you some good insight.
yeah. All right, awesome. Well, Brandon, thanks so much for being here and walking us through the movie fairy magic that is post-production. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Oh, there it is.
my pleasure. I hope you make it through your cold.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks so much. And thanks
Yeah.
everyone for joining on a Sunday morning if you're in LA. And yeah, good luck with all of your films.
Yeah. Good luck, everybody. To be well. Take care. I will see you all on the next one. Bye, everyone.